Tonight, we're not here to fix anything, not to understand everything, not to become someone better before you're allowed to rest. This is a quiet space where we gently let go and return to inner peace through soft Zen stories inspired by the Buddha, shared slowly so your mind can soften and your body can rest. Maybe today asked a little too much from you. Too many thoughts, too many worries, too many small things you tried to hold together. And maybe, just for this moment, you're ready to set them down. Here, you don't need to improve yourself. You don't need to solve tomorrow. You are already enough simply by being here, breathing quietly. Just for a moment. Where are you listening from tonight? Wherever you are, I'm grateful you're here, sharing this quiet space. Let your breath slow as if it remembers the way home. Let your shoulders soften like they no longer need to carry the world. Tonight, we'll listen to a simple story. A story from ordinary life, carrying a small thread of Zen and Buddhist wisdom. Not to give you more to think about, but to help you loosen your grip. Because suffering rarely ends by force. It softens when we stop holding it so tightly. There's nothing to rush, nothing to achieve, only a gentle drifting into rest, into stillness. Whether you stay awake or slowly fall asleep, this moment is already enough. And now, we begin tonight's journey with these Zen stories. It happened over something small. Not a breakup, not a job loss, not a disaster, just a tiny moment at a kitchen table that somehow felt like proof. A person sat under a warm overhead light with a notebook open and a pen that had stopped working. The page wasn't important. A few lines, a list of things to do, some half-finished thoughts, nothing that should have mattered. But the pen wouldn't write. They scribbled harder, tried again, pressed the tip against the paper with more force like effort alone could bring ink back. Nothing. The frustration rose quickly. Not because of the pen, because of what the pen represented. Another thing that doesn't work. Another sign that I can't get it together. The mind loves to turn small failures into identity statements. It doesn't say, "This pen is out of ink." It says, "You always end up stuck." That's how fear grows. It gathers evidence from tiny moments and builds a case. The body tightened. The jaw set. The shoulders pulled forward. The chest felt slightly compressed like air had less room. The pen was just a pen, but the feeling wasn't. The feeling was about pressure. Pressure to keep moving. Pressure to keep improving. Pressure to become something more than whatever this moment looked like. The person stared at the blank tip of the pen as if it had betrayed them. Then, without really thinking, they snapped it. Not in half. Just enough to make a small crack. A quiet plastic touch sound. The kind of sound that feels childish the moment it happens, like you've revealed you're not as calm as you pretend to be. They froze, listening to the silence that followed. The crack in the pen wasn't dramatic. The world didn't react. But inside, something did. Shame. Not loud, just a flush in the face. A heat that rose to the ears. The kind of shame that says, really, you can't even handle a pen. The mind piled on. What's wrong with me? Why am I like this? Why can't I just... The second arrow. The first arrow was frustration. The second arrow was self-attack. The pen lay on the table, slightly broken, useless now. The person's hand hovered over it, then pulled back, as if touching it would confirm the story. It would have been easy to spiral from there, to take this small moment and connect it to every other unfinished thing, every delay, every failure, every time life didn't look the way it was supposed to look. The mind does that naturally. It builds a timeline of regret. But there was something else in the room that night, something quiet and ordinary. A bowl of nuts sat on the counter, bought for snacking, mostly ignored. In the bowl was an acorn mixed in by accident from a fall decoration someone had left behind. Smooth brown capped, perfectly intact. It had been sitting there for weeks. The person noticed it only because their eyes needed somewhere else to land, somewhere that didn't accuse. They stood up and walked to the counter, not as a decision, more like a drift. Fingers picked up the acorn. It was surprisingly solid, heavier than it looked. The cap rough under the thumb, the shell smooth under the rest of the fingers. A small object, quiet, complete, and still inside it was something enormous. An oak tree doesn't arrive by staying intact. The acorn has to split. It has to break open. It has to lose its perfect shell. If it stays closed, it stays small forever, safe, whole, and useless. Growth requires fracture, not the violent kind, the natural kind, the kind that happens when something inside becomes too large for the old container. Holding the acorn, the person's breathing changed without noticing. Slower, lower. The mind didn't stop, but it softened. The broken pen on the table wasn't a disaster. It was a crack, a small break in the image of being in control. And that image, the perfect shell, had been exhausting to maintain. Sometimes the fear isn't that you'll fail. It's that you'll crack. Because cracking means you can't pretend anymore. You can't keep the smooth surface. You can't hide the pressure inside. But cracking is also how things begin. The person set the acorn down gently and returned to the table. The broken pen looked smaller now, less symbolic. More like what it actually was, a pen that needed replacing. They opened a drawer, found another one, tested it on the paper. Ink flowed easily. The line appeared without struggle. A small relief. But the deeper shift wasn't about the pen working. It was about the realization that the crack didn't ruin anything essential. The crack had simply revealed how tightly they'd been holding themselves together. The to-do list on the page was still there. The future was still uncertain. The pressure didn't disappear, but something had changed in the way it was carried. Not as a flawless shell, more like a seed that could break open. The crack stayed with them longer than expected. Not the crack in the pen that had already been tossed into the trash, but the idea of it. The sound. The feeling of something giving way after being held too tightly for too long. The evening moved on in small, ordinary steps. Dishes rinsed, lights dimmed. The notebook closed and set aside without being finished. Nothing heroic, nothing resolved. And yet the body felt different. Not lighter, not confident, just less armored. For a long time, effort had been confused with growth. The belief had been simple: if you push hard enough, if you keep yourself intact, if you don't show cracks, you'll eventually become what you're supposed to be. But effort alone doesn't create expansion. Sometimes it just creates pressure. The acorn sat back in its bowl on the counter, unchanged, quiet. It didn't announce what it would become. It didn't rush. It didn't compare itself to trees already standing tall. It simply waited for the conditions that would break it open. That's the part people misunderstand about growth. They imagine it as addition, more skills, more confidence, more success, layered on top of what's already there. But real growth is often subtraction, the loss of an old identity, the collapse of a familiar plan, the breaking of a shell that once felt protective. Fear shows up right at that breaking point. Not because something has gone wrong, but because something irreversible has begun. The fear says this is falling apart. Understanding says this is making room. Those two voices can sound very similar in the moment. The body leaned against the counter, feeling the cool surface through the thin fabric of a shirt. The breath moved in and out, steady now, not forced. The tightness in the chest hadn't vanished, but it no longer felt like an emergency. Cracking didn't mean failure. It meant pressure had reached its limit. And pressure reaching its limit is not a personal flaw. It's a physical truth. Seeds crack because they must, not because they are weak. The fear earlier hadn't been about the pen. It hadn't even been about productivity. It had been about losing the image of being composed, capable, unbreakable. But unbreakable things don't grow. They stay the same. The future still felt uncertain. That hadn't changed. There were still unanswered questions, still moments ahead that would test patience and confidence. But the fear of cracking had softened, because cracking had already happened and the world hadn't ended. Nothing essential had been lost. What had been lost was the illusion of needing to stay perfectly intact. The acorn didn't become a tree by staying whole. It became a tree by letting itself split. The thought didn't arrive as motivation. It arrived as permission. Permission to be unfinished. Permission to be in process. Permission to not know exactly who this version of yourself was becoming. The pressure to figure it all out eased slightly. Not because answers appeared, but because the demand for them relaxed. Growth doesn't always feel like moving forward. Sometimes it feels like breaking down. And that breaking down isn't the opposite of becoming. It's the entrance. The kitchen light cast a soft glow across the counter. Outside, the night stayed quiet. No signs, no messages, no confirmations. Just time moving steadily, doing what time does best. The acorn remained where it was whole for now, waiting for soil, water, darkness, the very things that would eventually break it open. And for the first time in a while, that breaking didn't feel like something to avoid. It felt like something to trust. Not because it would be easy, but because it was necessary. The crack wasn't the end of strength. It was the end of pretending that strength meant never breaking at all. The bathroom was quiet, except for the sound of water. Not rushing, not splashing. Just a steady stream hitting tile, breaking into softer echoes that filled the small space. Steam gathered slowly, blurring the edges of everything without fully hiding it. The person stood under the shower, eyes closed, letting the warmth do what it always did. Loosen muscles that had been tight all day, soften joints that had been held too stiff for too long. That's when the anger showed up. Not loudly, not all at once. It came as a tightness in the chest, a thought that slipped in sideways, a memory of a conversation that had already ended but hadn't stopped moving inside. Someone's words, someone's tone, a look that landed wrong. It didn't seem like much on the surface, the kind of moment that other people might shrug off without thinking twice. But the body had reacted strongly, almost disproportionately. That was the part that didn't make sense. The water ran over the shoulders, down the back. A hand reached out to steady against the wall. The tile felt solid, cool under wet skin. The mind replayed the moment again, slower this time. Why did that bother me so much? The question wasn't asked gently at first. It carried an edge, an accusation, as if the anger itself were a problem to be solved. The body answered instead, a familiar tightness in the stomach, a subtle clench in the jaw, a shallow breath that didn't quite make it all the way down. This wasn't new. The realization came quietly without drama. This reaction had happened before. Different people, different situations, same sharp spike, same lingering heat. The water kept falling, patient and indifferent. The steam thickened, fogging the mirror just outside the shower door. Shapes softened, reflections blurred. A memory surfaced, uninvited but clear, standing in front of a mirror years ago, younger, trying to understand a feeling that didn't match the situation. Seeing the same tension in the face then, the same guarded expression, the same sense of being braced against something unseen. The mirror doesn't create what it shows. It only reflects what's already there. The anger from earlier began to feel less like an attack from the outside and more like a flare from somewhere inside. Not invented, but triggered. The water pressure shifted slightly, a different note in the sound. The body adjusted without thought. The person rested their forehead briefly against the tile wall. The heat felt grounding. The contact steady. It wasn't that the other person hadn't been careless or insensitive or wrong. They might have been. But the intensity of this reaction didn't belong entirely to them. It belonged to a place that had been touched, a place that hadn't healed yet. The mind resisted that idea at first. It wanted the anger to stay justified, clean, directed outward, easier that way. But the body didn't argue. It recognized the pattern. Anger in moments like this wasn't just a defense. It was a signal. Something inside had been reflected back too clearly. The mirror in the bathroom was now fully fogged. Only vague outlines remained. The person reached out and wiped a small circle with the palm of their hand. An eye stared back, then another. The face didn't look furious. It looked exposed. The water continued to fall steady and warm. The room held the sound without judgment. Forgiveness hadn't appeared yet. It didn't need to. What had appeared was understanding not of the other person, but of the self. A recognition that some reactions are echoes. Old vibrations stirred up by new contact. The anger softened slightly, losing its sharp edges. It didn't disappear, but it became less urgent, less demanding. The mirror showed what it always does, not who caused the pain, but where it lives. The water kept running, and for the first time since the moment earlier that day, the person stopped arguing with the reflection. The water was turned off slowly, not all at once. The sudden quiet felt louder than expected. Droplets slid down skin, then fell to the floor in soft, irregular taps. Steam lingered in the air, holding the warmth a little longer before letting it go. The person stayed there, still inside the fog. There was no rush to step out. No need to dry off yet. The moment felt unfinished, but not in a tense way. More like something was settling into place. The anger from earlier hadn't vanished. It hovered nearby, quieter now, less sharp. Without the noise of the water, it was easier to hear what it was actually saying. It wasn't shouting anymore. It was pointing. The mirror still fogged, except for the small cleared circle reflected a softened version of the face. Lines less defined, edges blurred. The eyes looked tired, but calmer. The person wiped the mirror again, widening the clear space. More of the face came into focus. The expression wasn't accusing. It wasn't defensive. It looked like recognition. That comment earlier in the day, the one that had landed so hard, wasn't unique. It hadn't invented the pain. It had only pressed on something that was already sensitive. A place that had learned long ago to brace. The body remembered before the mind did. Moments of being dismissed, overlooked, spoken to in ways that felt small. Moments when reacting strongly hadn't been safe, so the reaction had learned to hide. Anger had become the guard at the door. It made sense now why it showed up so fast. Why it arrived with heat and certainty. It wasn't trying to start a fight. It was trying to protect something fragile. Understanding that changed the shape of it. The anger no longer felt like an enemy to suppress or justify. It felt like a messenger that had been misdirected for years. Forgiveness seen from here wasn't about the other person at all. It was about turning toward the place that had been reflected. The towel was reached for, wrapped around the shoulders. The fabric was rough and familiar grounding. The body felt heavier now, more present. Standing in front of the mirror, the person didn't analyze their face, didn't critique it, didn't search for flaws. They just looked. The reflection didn't need correcting. It needed acknowledgement. The person who had triggered the anger earlier was probably moving on with their day by now. Their words already dissolving into other conversations, other concerns. They weren't carrying this moment anymore. But the body had been. And that was where forgiveness belonged. Not as a pardon, not as an excuse, as a release of the expectation that someone else should heal what they didn't break. The mirror showed a small nod, barely perceptible, a quiet agreement between the body and the reflection. I see you. I know why that hurt. The steam began to thin. The room cooled gradually. The outlines sharpened again. The anger continued to fade, not into indifference, but into something more workable, less explosive, more honest. The mirror returned to being just a mirror. The person stepped away, feet touching the bath mat, feeling the texture beneath them. Another ordinary sensation anchoring the moment. There would be other triggers, other reflections, other times when old wounds caught the light at the wrong angle. But now, there was a pause where there used to be a reaction, a moment to recognize what was being shown. The towel was hung up. The light dimmed. The bathroom returned to quiet. And somewhere between the fog and the clearing, the person learned this: not every anger is about the person in front of you. Sometimes it's about what they accidentally helped you see. And when that's the case, forgiveness starts at the mirror. The laundromat smells like warm detergent and metal. Not unpleasant, just familiar. The kind of place that exists more for function than comfort. Rows of machines line the walls, most of them humming, some rattling slightly out of rhythm. The floor is clean, but permanently stained, marked by years of small spills no one remembers anymore. They sit on a plastic chair with a basket at their feet, watching clothes tumble behind thick glass. Shirts, towels, socks, everything mixing together, colors blurred by motion. It's late enough that the room is mostly empty. A man in the corner folds slowly, one item at a time. Someone else scrolls on their phone with headphones in. No one looks at anyone for too long. There's an unspoken agreement here. Everyone is tired. Everyone just wants to finish and go home. They pull a hoodie from the basket and notice a smear of something dark along the sleeve. Clay, maybe, or dirt. Hard to tell. It's dried, encrusted slightly, as if it's been there longer than today. They frown. All day it's felt like that. Like something has been stuck to them without permission. Other people's moods. A tense conversation. A look that lingered just long enough to make them question themselves. None of it dramatic. Just enough to feel off. They rub at the stain with their thumb. It doesn't come off. A familiar thought rises, quiet but sharp. Why do I always look like this by the end of the day? Not just the clothes, the feeling. They've learned to present well, to be capable, to keep things together. But by night there's always residue, fatigue, self-doubt, a sense of being worn down by contact. The dryer buzzes loudly, startling them just a little. They stand, unload warm clothes, and move to the folding table near the window. The surface is smooth, cool in spots where no one has touched it recently. As they fold, their hands move automatically. Years of repetition, the mind drifts. They remember something they once heard, maybe in a story, maybe in passing about a golden statue hidden under layers of clay to protect it from thieves. The gold had been covered over, made ordinary on purpose. Over time, people forgot what was underneath. They treated it like dirt. Until one day, the clay cracked. They'd liked that story when they first heard it. Thought it was comforting. Lately, it feels more uncomfortable than inspiring. Because what if the clay never cracks on its own? What if people only ever see the outer layer? They fold another shirt, smoothing the fabric carefully, as if doing so might smooth something else too. There's a tension in their chest they've grown used to. Not panic, just a low-grade bracing. Like they're always preparing for judgment, even in places where no one is really watching. They catch their reflection in the darkened window. Fluorescent lights above night behind the glass. Their face looks flat in this lighting, washed out. Tired, they turn away. It's easier not to look too closely. The thought comes again, softer this time. Maybe this is just who I am. The outer layer, the roughness, the unremarkable version. Maybe there was never anything precious underneath. Maybe the story was just a story. They feel a flicker of sadness at that. Quick, contained. They've learned not to linger there. The machines continue their steady noise. Clothes tumble. Time passes. They finish folding and place everything neatly back into the basket. The hoodie with a stain goes in last. They hesitate, then leave it as it is. No scrubbing, no fixing, just folded like the rest. There's something tiring about constantly trying to clean yourself up. As they lift the basket and head for the door, they feel the familiar weight settle back onto their shoulders. The day hasn't ended yet. There's still a drive home, still things to prepare for tomorrow. But the image of the statue stays with them, gold covered in clay, not damaged, just hidden. They step out into the cool night air. The door closes behind them with a soft thud. For a moment they stand still, breathing, basket balanced on one hip. They don't feel golden, but they don't feel broken either. Just layered. And something about that feels unfinished rather than lost. The drive home is quiet. Streetlights pass in slow intervals, lighting up the windshield for a second before fading again. The basket sits on the passenger seat, steady, familiar. Nothing about the night feels urgent. It's just moving forward one block at a time. At a stoplight, they glance down at their hands on the steering wheel. The skin looks dry in the glow of the dashboard, faint lines visible around the knuckles. Hands that have worked all day, held things together. Let go of things that didn't need to be held anymore. They think again about the clay. How it didn't appear overnight. How it must have been applied carefully, layer by layer, to protect something valuable from being taken too soon. How at first it probably felt heavy, uncomfortable, but necessary. They've had layers like that too. The careful tone they use in difficult conversations. The way they keep emotions contained, tidy, easy for others to handle. The habit of being useful, agreeable, low maintenance. Those layers didn't form because something was wrong inside. They formed because at some point it wasn't safe to be fully seen, or fully felt, or fully honest. Clay is not an accident. It's a response. They pull into the driveway and turn off the engine. The house is dark except for a small light in the hallway. Inside, everything is still. Shoes by the door, mail on the counter, a familiar quiet that doesn't ask questions. They carry the basket in and set it down near the couch. One hoodie slips out slightly, the stained sleeve visible again. They pause, then pick it up. This time they look at it differently. Not as something dirty, as something that's been out in the world. They think about how quickly they label parts of themselves as problems. How fast they assume the outer layer is the truth. As if exhaustion equals emptiness. As if roughness means lack. But clay doesn't erase gold. It hides it when hiding is needed. They sit down and rest the hoodie in their lap, fingers tracing the dried mark on the sleeve. It's stiff there, textured. Evidence of contact. Evidence of having been somewhere real. For years they've been waiting for the moment when they'll finally feel clean enough to be themselves. When confidence arrives. When doubt disappears. When they no longer need protective layers. But maybe that moment was never about removing everything at once. Maybe healing is not a dramatic unveiling. Maybe it's a slow remembering. They fold the hoodie again more loosely this time and place it on the couch beside them. The room feels calm. Not warm, not cold, just neutral enough to breathe in. They realize something quietly important. They don't need to break the clay tonight. They don't need to expose anything. They don't need to prove the gold exists. Knowing it's there is enough. The pressure to perform eases. The habit of self-inspection softens. Not gone, just less loud. They stand and put the clothes away, one drawer at a time. The rhythm is grounding. The body knows what to do even when the mind is tired. When everything is done, they turn off the lights and sit for a moment in the dark. The house settles around them. Pipes click. A distant car passes. Ordinary sounds holding the night together. They place a hand on their chest, without thinking, feeling the steady beat underneath. Reliable. Unimpressed by surface conditions. Gold doesn't need constant confirmation. It doesn't dull because of contact. It doesn't disappear because it's covered. It waits. As they head toward bed, there's no sudden confidence, no emotional swell. Just a simple shift in posture. Less guarded, less apologetic. They are not made of clay. They never were. The clay was just the way they learned to stay intact. And now, in the quiet of this room, they understand something gently and completely. What's most valuable about them has never been at risk, only hidden for a while. That's not a loss. That's protection doing its job. The path around the pond is quiet at night. Not silent, just calm in a way that doesn't ask to be noticed. Crickets fill the air with a steady rhythm. Somewhere nearby, water moves gently against the edge, a soft sound that blends into everything else. The pond itself is still. Moonlight stretches across the surface, pale and clear. The reflection is sharp tonight, almost solid. It looks close enough to touch, close enough to reach for. There's a pause at the edge of the water. The moon seems to float right there, resting on the surface, as if it belongs to the pond. It's easy to forget where it really is. Easy to believe that if you reached out carefully, slowly enough, you could hold it. That's how worry works. It presents itself as something real, something tangible, something you can grasp if you just try hard enough, if you think about it long enough, if you reach a little further. A hand moves forward, hovering above the water. The reflection stays perfectly still, undisturbed. Convincing. The thought arrives quietly. What if this never works out? It feels solid, grounded, logical, like the moon in the water right there demanding attention. The hand lowers slightly. The water breaks. Ripples spread outward fast and uneven. The reflection shatters instantly, breaking into fragments that move away from each other, disappearing into motion. The moon is suddenly nowhere to be found. The hand pulls back. The pond doesn't look empty now. It looks restless, disturbed. What was clear moments ago is now confused, scattered, unreadable. That familiar tightening appears in the chest. This happens so easily. One anxious thought appears. It feels real, close, manageable. So the mind reaches for it, engages with it, tries to understand it, control it, fix it. And the moment it's touched, everything stirs. The worry multiplies, splits, sends ripples through other thoughts. Memories get pulled in. Futures are imagined. The original concern becomes harder to see, not clearer. The moon was never in the water, but the mind forgets that. The surface of the pond slowly begins to calm again. Ripples widen, soften, then fade. The reflection returns piece by piece until the moon appears whole once more. Nothing was broken. Nothing was lost. Only the surface was disturbed. The same is true inside. When anxiety shows up, it often looks like truth, like reality, like something you must respond to. But many worries are reflections, not facts. Images shaped by light and movement, not by substance. The trouble starts when the mind tries to grab them. Another thought drifts through, I should think this through more. It sounds responsible, almost caring. But the memory of the water lingers. Reaching doesn't bring clarity. It brings ripples. The path curves slightly around the pond. Walking resumes slow and unhurried. The moon's reflection follows, staying just out of reach, unchanged by movement along the shore. The moon itself, high above, remains untouched by everything happening below. It hasn't moved. It hasn't reacted. It hasn't been affected. There's a subtle comfort in that. The worries that appeared earlier don't feel gone. They're still present somewhere, like the reflection still resting on the surface. But they no longer feel solid. They no longer feel like something that must be handled right now. They feel like what they are: images. Anxiety doesn't always lie, but it often exaggerates. It takes something distant and makes it feel close. Takes something imagined and makes it feel urgent. Like mistaking a reflection for the thing itself, the pond grows quieter again. The moon settles back into its place on the water, bright and unreachable. The path continues forward, lit just enough to see where the next step goes. No reaching, just walking, just letting the surface be. The water settles more quickly this time. Ripples stretch outward, then thin, then disappear into the dark. The surface becomes smooth again, like nothing ever touched it. The moon's reflection returns without effort, clear and whole exactly where it was before. It didn't need to be fixed. It didn't need to be guided back. It simply appeared when the surface stopped moving. That detail lingers. The mind often assumes clarity comes from effort, from reaching, analyzing, rehearsing, from keeping a thought close until it finally gives up its meaning. But standing by the pond, watching the reflection return on its own, it's hard to ignore the opposite truth. Some things become clear only when they're left alone. Another worry shows up quieter than before. It doesn't announce itself. It just slips in, familiar and subtle. The kind that usually grows if given even a little attention. It's noticed immediately, not judged, not pushed away, just seen like noticing a cloud pass across the moon. There's no reaching this time. No attempt to grab the thought, shape it, or pull answers from it. It's allowed to hover the way the reflection hovers on the water, present but untouchable. Without interference, it doesn't intensify. It doesn't branch out. It doesn't send ripples through everything else. It stays thin. The path curves again, moving farther from the pond. Trees line the edge now, their silhouettes dark against the night sky. The moon is partially hidden behind branches visible in pieces. And yet it's still there, even when it can't be fully seen. The same is true for peace. It doesn't disappear just because it's obscured. It doesn't leave just because worry passes in front of it. It remains steady and unchanged, even when the surface looks busy. Anxiety feels convincing because it borrows light from something real. It reflects fear, memory, imagination, and turns them into images that look solid. But when examined closely, when touched, it falls apart into movement. This isn't something that needs to be remembered as a lesson. It's something that can be felt. The difference between reaching and not reaching, between stirring the surface and letting it rest, between mistaking the reflection for the moon. The night air feels cooler now. The sounds around the pond soften. Crickets quiet down. Water laps gently against the shore, no longer disturbed. There's a growing ease in not needing to do anything about what appears. Thoughts still rise. They always will. Reflections will continue to show up on the surface of the mind. But they don't all need to be engaged. They don't all need to be touched. Some can be seen and left exactly where they are. The moon hasn't followed the movement along the path. It hasn't tried to keep up. It doesn't care where attention goes. It simply stays where it is. That's the quiet reassurance in this moment. You don't have to chase clarity. You don't have to capture peace. You don't have to reach for what's already present. The path eventually turns away from the pond entirely. The reflection disappears from view, not because it's gone, but because the angle has changed. The moon remains above, unseen but steady. And the mind, having stopped reaching, feels lighter, less busy, less pulled in different directions, not empty, just untroubled. The water behind returns to complete stillness. The reflection holds undisturbed by footsteps now far away. Nothing needed to be taken. Nothing needed to be held. The moment passed, and everything remained exactly where it belonged. The moon in the sky, the reflection on the water, and the mind no longer trying to grasp what was never meant to be touched. It wasn't that the future felt dark. It felt distant, like something just out of view, not because it was hidden, but because the angle was wrong. A person stood in the kitchen late at night, one light still on above the sink. The rest of the house had already settled. The dishwasher hummed quietly, water moving in a steady rhythm behind a closed door. On the counter, a phone lay face up, screen dark, finally resting. The body leaned against the counter, weight shifted onto one hip. The posture wasn't tense. It was tired in a softer way, like someone who had been holding something too long and hadn't realized it yet. Thoughts drifted toward the future, as they often do at this hour. What's next? Am I heading in the right direction? What if I'm already behind? The questions didn't come with panic. They came with a dull pressure, a sense of being slightly off balance. As if life were moving forward and somehow quietly, they weren't. Fear doesn't always shout. Sometimes it nudges. The mind began reviewing the past, not because it wanted nostalgia, but because the past felt solid, finished, known. Earlier decisions replayed themselves. Turns that had been taken, turns that hadn't. Conversations that could have gone differently. Opportunities that might have mattered more than they seemed at the time. The mind walked backward through memory step by step, trying to understand how things had landed here. The trouble was, while the mind walked backward, life kept moving forward. That mismatch created the unease. The future felt frightening, not because it was threatening, but because it wasn't being faced directly. It was being approached with eyes turned behind, checking where the feet had already been. Anyone who's tried to walk that way knows the feeling. You can move, but you don't trust your steps. Every shift of weight feels uncertain. You're more likely to stumble not because the ground is unsafe, but because you can't see where you're going. The body picked up a glass from the counter and filled it with water. The sound of it pouring cut cleanly through the thoughts. Clear, immediate. The glass was set down. Fingers felt the cool condensation, a simple anchor. Still, the mind wandered back again. Other people seemed further along. They figured it out sooner. I should have known by now. Comparison slipped in quietly, dressed as concern. Fear loves comparison because it gives the illusion of measurement. If you can place yourself on a scale, you can decide whether to rush panic or give up. But scales only work when everyone is moving in the same direction. The truth was, no one else's path could be seen clearly from here. Only fragments, only highlights, only outcomes, never the confusion that came before them. The dishwasher clicked, shifting to a new cycle. The sound changed slightly, then settled again. Ordinary, reassuring. The body noticed something, then the way the shoulders were slightly hunched as if bracing for a collision that hadn't happened yet. The jaw held a quiet tension. Breath stayed shallow, hovering near the chest. Fear had crept in through posture, not thoughts. It wasn't afraid of what would happen next. It was afraid of stepping forward without certainty. The future asks for movement without guarantees. The past offers clarity, but no direction. So the mind does what feels safest. It looks back while moving forward. But that safety is an illusion. Walking backward doesn't stop motion. It just makes it harder. The glass of water was lifted and sipped. Coolness spread through the chest. The sensation was immediate, undeniable. Right now was happening whether or not the future felt clear. The kitchen light buzzed faintly. The hum of appliances continued. The body stood here breathing, supported by the floor beneath bare feet. These were facts. The imagined judgments of the future were not. Fear had turned the future into a threat by making it unknown. But the future had always been unknown. The only difference now was how tightly the mind was gripping the need to understand it in advance. There was a moment's small quiet when attention shifted away from the timeline entirely. Not to answers, to orientation. What if the problem isn't where I'm going, but how I'm looking? The thought didn't resolve anything. It didn't calm everything down, but it loosened something. The body straightened slightly, shoulders rolled back, breath dropped a little lower. Not confidence, just alignment. The future didn't need to be solved tonight. It needed to be faced. Walking forward doesn't mean knowing the destination. It means trusting your ability to take the next step while looking ahead. The phone remained dark. No new information arrived. Nothing external changed. But inside, the realization settled gently. Fear of the future can come from moving the right way, with your gaze turned the wrong direction. The dishwasher continued its steady work. The kitchen stayed warm and quiet. And for the first time that night, the idea of tomorrow felt less like a wall and more like open space, still unknown, still wide, but no longer approached in reverse. The future didn't move any closer. It stayed where it always is, just ahead, undefined, not asking to be solved all at once. What changed wasn't the distance. It was the stance. The body stood more evenly now, weight distributed, instead of leaning away from something unseen. The subtle shift felt physical before it felt mental. Like adjusting your footing before realizing you were off balance. Fear had been doing what it does best, trying to protect by reviewing what had already happened. The past felt safer because it was complete. Every mistake already known. Every success already measured. Nothing left to surprise you there, but safety and growth don't live in the same direction. The past can explain, but it can't guide. It can inform, but it can't lead. The dishwasher hummed on, indifferent to timelines. Water moved, heat cycled. The machine didn't worry about whether it was ahead or behind schedule. It just did the next right thing in its sequence. There was something instructive in that simplicity. The mind often wants a map before it moves. It wants guarantees before it commits weight to the next step. But life doesn't hand out maps in advance. It offers ground one step at a time. Walking backward through life feels careful. It feels responsible. but it creates tension because the body is always bracing for what it can't see. Fear thrives in that posture. Facing forward doesn't mean rushing. It means orienting your attention toward what's actually arriving. The body turned slightly, opening toward the room instead of the counter. A small movement, almost meaningless. But it aligned. The spine opened, the chest invited breath to move more freely. The future wasn't something to crash into. It was something to meet. The thoughts about being behind still surfaced, but they no longer stuck as tightly. They floated by like passing cars on a street, noticeable but not in control. Comparison lost some of its grip once attention returned to direction. Everyone looks ahead at a different pace. Everyone steps onto the unknown from a different place. There is no universal timeline, only movement. The glass of water was empty now. It was rinsed and placed upside down in the rack. The action was simple, complete. One small thing finished. That mattered. Finishing something, even something small, reminds the body that forward motion is possible without having the whole future planned. Fear often disguises itself as caution, but caution that prevents movement isn't caution. It's hesitation. The difference becomes clear when you feel it in your muscles. Hesitation tightens. It pulls you backward. It keeps your eyes on where you've already been. Movement loosens. It allows uncertainty without demanding certainty. The future still held questions: career, direction, identity. None of that had been answered in the kitchen that night. But something more important had shifted. The need to answer everything before stepping forward had eased. Facing forward doesn't mean ignoring the past. It means letting it be behind you. The past had already done its work. It had shaped skills, values, preferences. It didn't need to be carried like a rear-view mirror pressed against the face. The road ahead didn't require speed. It required sight. Seeing what's in front of you. Responding to what shows up next. The kitchen light was turned off. The room dimmed, but not completely. The ambient glow from outside softened the edges. Darkness felt navigable now, not disorienting. Walking forward doesn't guarantee safety. It guarantees engagement. And engagement is what fear has been asking for all along. Not avoidance, not rehearsal, but presence. The body moved toward the hallway. Each step landed where it landed. No slipping, no stumbling, just walking. The future didn't rush in. It waited as it always does. And this time it was being approached face first. The grocery parking lot was louder than it needed to be. Carts rattled over uneven pavement. Car doors opened and closed too hard. Somewhere a horn was held a second longer than necessary. The sky hung low and gray, pressing down on everything, making even small sounds feel sharp. The person stood beside their car with the trunk open, one hand gripping a grocery bag, the other resting on the edge of the hatch. The bag was heavier than expected. Not because of what was inside, but because of how the body was holding itself. Tight, alert, ready. Earlier that day, everything had started piling up. Emails marked urgent, conversations that went nowhere, A last-minute change that unraveled careful plans, none of it catastrophic, all of it irritating in a way that stacked. Now it felt like the world was daring them to snap. Someone brushed past too close with a cart. Another car pulled into a spot, aggressively, tires squealing slightly. A voice nearby rose in frustration over something small and already lost. The chest tightened. The body leaned forward just a little, as if bracing against incoming weather. Anger in moments like this doesn't need a single cause. It feeds on accumulation. The grocery bag was lifted into the trunk and set down harder than intended. Cans clinked together loud and metallic. The sound echoed in the hollow space and then vanished. The mind immediately offered commentary. Of course this happens now. Why is everyone so careless? Can't anyone slow down? Each thought sharpened the next. The storm wasn't just outside, it was inside. The person closed the trunk part way, then stopped. The latch hovered inches from locking suspended. There was a memory not from today, but from long ago. Sitting through a storm as a kid. Rain pounding the roof so hard it sounded like something trying to break in. Wind howling around corners, bending trees into unfamiliar shapes. And then the quiet. Not the end of the storm, but its center. The eye. A place where everything paused, where the air went still, where the chaos circled at a distance loud, but no longer on top of you. That memory came back now with surprising clarity. The trunk was closed gently this time. The sound was solid, final, but not aggressive. The hand stayed there for a moment longer than necessary, palm flat against the cool metal. The body noticed its own posture. Shoulders lifted, jaw set, breath shallow. All signs of fighting weather. The parking lot hadn't done anything personal. Neither had the people in it. They were all just moving through their own versions of the same pressure. The person stepped back from the car and leaned lightly against it. The metal was cool through clothing, grounding. The noise didn't stop, but it changed in relation to the body. It was no longer everywhere. It was around. A cart clattered by. A child cried briefly, then quieted. An engine turned over and drove away. Sounds layered on top of each other, messy and human. The breath slowed just a fraction. The realization didn't arrive as wisdom. It arrived as relief. I don't have to match this pace. Anger had been pushing the body to meet the storm head on. To harden. To brace. To move faster and louder, just to stay upright. But standing here back against the car, it became clear how unnecessary that was. Storms don't respond to force. They don't calm because you yell back. They pass when they pass. The person stayed still for another moment. Not to meditate, not to escape, just to stop feeding the momentum. The mind tried once more to list grievances, to tally up reasons for irritation. It didn't get far. Without the body's full cooperation, the thoughts lost their edge. They became observations instead of weapons. The parking lot remained chaotic. Nothing had changed out there, but inside, something had. The storm was still happening, but the person was no longer standing in its center. They had stepped just slightly into a quieter place within it. and for the first time all day, that felt like enough. The parking lot didn't quiet down. If anything, it grew busier. Another row of cars arrived at once. A cart tipped over somewhere, metal clanging sharply before someone righted it. Voices overlapped, impatient, distracted, already late for something else. But leaning against the car, the person noticed something unexpected. The noise didn't feel as close. It was still loud, still messy, still irritating if examined too closely. But it no longer pressed directly against the chest. It hovered at a small distance, like weather seen through a window, instead of felt on bare skin. The breath found a slower rhythm without being guided. In through the nose, out through the mouth, not deep, not deliberate, just less hurried. The body had stopped trying to win. Earlier, anger had felt necessary, like armor, like the only way to move through all this friction without being knocked over. But armor is heavy, and wearing it for too long makes even standing feel like work. Standing here now, the person felt the difference immediately. The shoulders softened, the hands unclenched, the jaw loosened just enough to notice it had been tight all along. The storm continued to circle. A driver argued loudly with someone over a parking spot. A cart bumped the car lightly and rolled away. Someone muttered an apology without slowing down. None of it required a response. That realization carried an unexpected relief. So much anger is born from the belief that everything needs answering, that every disruption is a challenge, that every careless moment must be corrected or endured with force. But storms don't ask for engagement. They ask for shelter. The person thought again of that childhood memory, of sitting inside while rain lashed the roof, listening to the wind move around the house, feeling the violence of it without being pulled into it. The eye of the storm isn't created by fighting the wind. It exists because of where you stand. The hand lifted from the car and rested briefly over the chest. The heartbeat felt steady, present, not rushed. Forgiveness in this moment didn't feel like kindness toward anyone else in the parking lot. It felt like permission. Permission not to absorb the chaos. Permission not to harden in response. Permission to let the storm stay outside. The anger hadn't disappeared. It still flickered now and then, especially when a sound cut too sharply or someone moved too abruptly. But it no longer dictated posture or pace. It was weather, not identity. The person reached into the trunk again, this time calmly, and picked up the last bag. The weight felt different now, not lighter, but easier to carry. Walking toward the cart returned, the noise shifted again. The storm closed in slightly, then moved past. The body adjusted without panic. This was the eye. Not silence, not control. Just a place inside that stayed steady while everything else spun. There would be other days like this. Other crowded places. Other moments where irritation stacked until it felt personal and unavoidable. But now, there was a reference point. A knowing that calm doesn't require the world to cooperate. It requires a decision not to join the frenzy. The cart slid into place with a dull final sound. The person turned back toward the car. The sky remained gray, The parking lot remained loud. None of that needed fixing. The door opened. The seat welcomed the body. The door closed again, sealing off some of the noise, but not all of it. The engine started. The dashboard lights glowed softly. As the car pulled out of the lot, the storm was still there, swirling, impatient, unchanged. But the person carried the eye with them, and that was enough to move forward without anger choosing the direction. The wind is stronger than expected. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady enough to be noticed. It moves through the backyard, brushing past the fence, rustling the leaves of the plants lined up along the edge. Most of them barely respond. A few stiff branches creak and hold their ground. The bamboo does something else. It bends. Not all at once, not in a hurry. The tall green stalks lean with the wind bow slightly, then return to center when the air shifts again. There's no snapping sound, no resistance, just movement that looks almost practiced. He stands near the back door with a mug of tea cooling in his hands and watches longer than he means to. The day has been full in the quiet way. Meetings that weren't difficult but still required attention. Conversations where he listened more than he spoke. Small decisions that added up. Nothing worth complaining about, yet his chest feels tight anyway. He's used to that feeling. For most of his life, he's believed that being strong meant holding firm, staying solid, keeping everything contained so nothing spills out where it shouldn't. He learned early how to keep his thoughts inside, how to manage reactions, how to be the one people could rely on. Reliable doesn't bend. Reliable doesn't waver. At least that's what he told himself. The bamboo leans again, this time further. A stronger gust passes through, and the stalks bow deeply, almost parallel to the ground. For a split second, he expects to hear something crack. Nothing does. When the wind eases, the bamboo rises back up unchanged. He exhales without realizing he was holding his breath. There's something unsettling about how simple it looks. He's spent years tightening himself against pressure, bracing, locking down emotions before they become visible, filling every quiet space with control so nothing unexpected can enter. He's been praised for it, for being calm, for being steady, for not making things harder than they already are. But lately that steadiness has started to feel heavy. He takes a sip of the tea. It's already lukewarm. He doesn't mind. The warmth spreads anyway. Inside the house, the clock ticks faintly. A dishwasher hums. Ordinary sounds continuing without his input. The world doesn't seem to require his constant grip the way he's assumed it does. Another gust passes through the yard. The bamboo bends again. He notices something he hadn't before. The stalks are hollow. He's seen bamboo cut open before, clean, empty centers running the length of each piece. That emptiness isn't weakness. It's what allows the plant to move without breaking. A solid trunk would snap under this kind of pressure. Hollow space gives room. The thought lands quietly without explanation. He's been filling himself for years, filling silence with answers, filling uncertainty with plans, filling discomfort with effort, as if emptiness were something dangerous that needed to be avoided. But what if the opposite is true? What if the tightness in his chest doesn't come from being too weak, but from being too full? He shifts his weight and leans against the doorframe. His shoulders drop slightly. The sensation surprises him. He didn't tell them to relax. They just did. There are things he carries that don't belong to him anymore. Old expectations. Roles he grew into because they were needed once. Habits of self-control that kept him safe, then slowly became cages. He's never questioned them. Letting go felt irresponsible, like leaving a post unmanned. But the bamboo doesn't guard against the wind. It cooperates with it. Another thought follows softer. Maybe strength isn't about staying rigid. Maybe it's about staying open. The idea doesn't demand action. It doesn't ask him to change anything tonight. It simply creates space. The wind eases. The bamboo stands tall again, green and quiet, as if nothing happened at all. He finishes the tea and sets the mug down on the counter. His hands feel looser, his breathing slower. Nothing dramatic has shifted. No insight he needs to explain later. Just a subtle release. He looks back at the yard one more time. The bamboo waits. The wind will come again, and it will bend again without fear. Something in him recognizes that rhythm, not as a lesson, as a possibility. Later that evening, the wind settles. Not completely. It still moves through the yard now and then, but with less insistence. The bamboo sways more gently, like it's breathing rather than reacting. He sits at the kitchen table with a folded towel in front of him, hands resting on either side. The house is quiet, in the way it only gets after a long day has fully ended. No expectations left hanging. No one needing anything from him right now. He notices how unusual that feels. For years, he's carried the sense that something must always be held in place. A decision, a mood, a situation that could slip if he didn't keep pressure on it. Even in quiet moments, his body stayed alert, prepared to intervene. Prepared for what he's never been sure. He looks down at his hands. The skin is dry from washing dishes earlier. Fine lines cross his palms, familiar as a map he's learned to read without thinking. These hands have fixed things, carried things, steadied other people when they needed it. They've also clenched often, without permission. He presses his palms flat against the table and feels the solid surface beneath them. It doesn't move. It doesn't need him to brace it. The simple contact sends a small signal through his arms, grounding him in a way that feels new. He realizes that much of his strength has come from holding on. Holding opinions steady, holding emotions back, holding himself together when it felt like things might unravel if he didn't. That kind of strength works for a while, but it's tiring. The bamboo outside doesn't look tired. It doesn't accumulate tension. It releases it with every movement. Each bend is temporary. Each return to center happens naturally without effort or self-congratulation. He's never allowed himself that. He's believed that if he loosens his grip even slightly, something important will be lost. That calm depends on constant control. That letting go means letting things fall apart. But nothing fell apart when he stopped watching the yard. Nothing fell apart when he set the mug down and walked away. Nothing fell apart when he leaned instead of braced. The realization isn't comforting at first. It's unsettling. If the world doesn't require his constant tension, then how much of his effort has been unnecessary? He sits with that question for a moment, not trying to answer it. The towel stays folded. The clock ticks. Outside, a light breeze passes through again, and the bamboo responds as it always does. He thinks about the hollow center, about how empty space isn't absence, it's allowance. It's what lets movement pass through without damage. It's what keeps the stalk intact when pressure arrives. He's spent so much time filling himself with responsibility that there's been no room left to bend, no room to feel without fixing, no room to listen without planning a response, no room to rest without guilt. He doesn't need to empty himself completely. He just needs to stop packing himself so tightly. He stands and moves to the sink, rinsing his hands under warm water. The sensation is simple and grounding. Water flows over his skin, then disappears down the drain. Nothing held, nothing saved. He dries his hands and notices how natural the motion feels. Letting go isn't dramatic, it's practical. Back at the table, he sits again, posture easier now. Not slouched, just unforced. His breath moves without instruction, in and out. No commentary. He understands something quietly important. Being open doesn't mean being weak. Being hollow doesn't mean being empty. It means there's space for life to move through without breaking him. The wind outside fades completely now. The bamboo stands still, not rigid, just resting. Tomorrow there will be pressure again. Expectations, conversations, moments that ask something of him. He knows that. The world hasn't changed, but the way he meets it might. He doesn't need to harden to be strong. He doesn't need to brace to be steady. He doesn't need to fill every space to be whole. He turns off the kitchen light and walks down the hallway, the house settling into darkness behind him. The bamboo remains where it is, rooted and flexible, ready for whatever comes next. And for the first time in a long while, he feels the same. Not because he's holding himself together, but because he isn't. The hourglass sits on the shelf by the window. It's small, decorative, something that was bought without much thought and then forgotten about. Most days it blends into the background, just another object in the room. Tonight it's picked up. The glass feels smooth and cool in the hand. The sand inside is pale, almost white. It hasn't been turned in a long time. When it is flipped, the first few grains hesitate, clinging to the narrow neck before letting go. Then they begin to fall, one by one. There's something strangely calming about watching it. No rush, no effort. Just a quiet, steady movement that doesn't respond to attention. The sand doesn't fall faster because it's watched. It doesn't slow down either. It follows its own pace. The mind, on the other hand, is rarely that patient. Even as the sand begins its descent, thoughts start moving ahead. What happens when it's empty? Should I be doing something while this is happening? How much time does this represent really? The mind is already in the future. That's its habit. It skips over the present without noticing, jumping ahead to what comes next or back to what already happened. Rarely does it stay with what's actually unfolding. The sand continues to fall. A grain drops, then another, then another. Each one completes its journey fully before the next follows. There's no overlap, no stacking, no rushing to catch up. It's impossible to watch all of them at once. The mind resists this simplicity. It wants to count, to measure, to know how long until the bottom fills, how much time is left, what should be done before it runs out. That's when the familiar tension appears. The subtle pressure to get ahead of time instead of living inside it. Overthinking often comes from this exact place. From trying to live more than one moment at once. From carrying the weight of future grains while the current one is still falling. The hourglass doesn't do that. It doesn't worry about the grains that haven't dropped yet. It doesn't regret the ones that already have. It only allows what's passing through right now to pass. There's a shift in posture. The body leans closer, elbows resting on the knees. The sound of the room fades slightly as attention narrows, not in a tense way, but in a curious one. A grain falls. It's barely noticeable on its own, insignificant even. If you looked away for a second, you'd miss it entirely, and yet the entire process depends on it. The mind often dismisses the present moment because it feels too small, too ordinary, not important enough to focus on. It waits for something bigger, more meaningful, more conclusive. But the hourglass doesn't wait. It doesn't skip moments. It doesn't jump ahead. It honors each grain equally, no matter how quiet or unremarkable it is. The sand gathers slowly at the bottom. There's no drama in the accumulation, no announcement when the pile grows higher. It simply happens one grain at a time. The mind notices how hard it usually is to do this. To stay with just one thing. To live one moment without dragging others into it. Another grain falls. The breath follows it unconsciously, lengthening slightly. The shoulders soften. The jaw releases its grip. Nothing has been solved. No decision has been made. No insight has been reached. And yet, there's less urgency. Time doesn't feel like it's running out. It feels like it's passing. That difference matters. The hourglass continues its quiet work. The top chamber empties slowly, steadily. The bottom fills without complaint. There's no effort involved. The mind begins to sense that maybe it doesn't need to carry everything at once. Maybe it only needs to be present for what's falling through right now. Just this grain. Not the next one, not the last one. This one. The sand keeps falling. There's no signal when it's halfway done. No marker that says, you're doing well, or you should be further along by now. It doesn't speed up to make up for lost time. And it doesn't slow down to stretch the moment. It just continues. The mind notices how different this feels from the way it usually treats time. Most days, time feels like something to manage, something to chase, protect, or race against. The present moment becomes a narrow bridge, something to cross as quickly as possible so you can get to what's next. But watching the hourglass makes it clear there is no bridge. there's only falling. Another grain slips through the narrow opening. It doesn't hesitate. It doesn't check what came before it. It doesn't ask what's coming after. It just completes its one small movement. The mind tries to interfere again. What if I'm wasting time right now? What if I should be doing something more useful? What if this calm doesn't last? These thoughts arrive automatically, almost politely, as if they're trying to help. But standing here watching the sand, their urgency feels misplaced. Nothing about the hourglass suggests that watching is a waste. Nothing about the falling grains suggests that this moment needs improvement. The body adjusts slightly, settling into a more comfortable position. There's less tension in the shoulders now, less leaning forward. Breathing deepens again quietly without effort. The mind begins to understand something not as a rule, but as an experience. You can only live one grain at a time. Trying to live the next grain early doesn't make it arrive faster. Holding on to the last grain doesn't bring it back. All the effort in the world won't change the pace. And yet the mind spends so much energy trying to do exactly that. Overthinking often feels like trying to catch all the sand at once. Trying to plan regret, anticipate and control moments that aren't here yet or that are already gone. But the hourglass refuses to cooperate with that approach. It doesn't allow shortcuts. It only allows presence. The top chamber grows lighter now. The bottom grows fuller. There's no sense of loss in the transition. Nothing is disappearing. The sand isn't gone. It's just moved. That's another thing the mind tends to forget. Moments don't vanish when they pass. They change form. They settle. They become part of what supports the next moment. The sand at the bottom holds the weight of everything that came before it. Quietly, without complaint, the last few grains begin to fall more slowly. Or maybe they always fell at the same pace, and it's only now that attention is sharpened enough to notice them individually. Each one makes its own tiny descent. There's no rush to flip the hourglass yet. No need to start the cycle again. This moment hasn't finished doing what it's here to do. The mind stays with it, not forcing, not counting, just watching. This is what it feels like when overthinking loosens its grip. Not because thoughts stop, but because they no longer try to occupy multiple moments at once. The mind isn't empty, it's aligned. When the final grain drops, there's no sound, no signal, just a quiet completion that could easily be missed if you weren't paying attention. The hourglass is full at the bottom now, empty at the top. Nothing dramatic happened, and yet something feels complete. There's a gentle understanding that this is how life actually moves. Not in big leaps, not in dramatic shifts, but in small, steady moments that ask to be lived one at a time. The hourglass is set back on the shelf, not turned over again. Not yet. The room feels different now. Not because anything changed, but because nothing is being rushed. Time doesn't feel like an enemy anymore. It feels like a companion. The next moment will arrive when it arrives. The next grain will fall when it's ready. There's no need to reach for it early. For now, this moment has already landed, and that is enough. It waited all day. Not loudly, not insistently. Just there, sitting in the corner of attention, taking up more space than it deserved. The email hadn't been opened. It arrived in the late morning, a subject line just vague enough to feel heavy. Nothing dramatic. No red flags. Just a few neutral words that could mean anything. And that was the problem. The phone lay on the table screen, dark now, but the mind kept returning to it. Not to read it, just to imagine it. What if it's bad news? What if I missed something important? What if this changes everything? Fear doesn't need content. It only needs shape. By evening, the body felt slightly tense without knowing why. Shoulders sat higher than usual, jaw tightened and release tightened again. The breath stayed shallow, like it was waiting for permission to go deeper. Nothing had happened. And yet, something felt wrong. The mind filled the empty space efficiently. It built a story with impressive detailed tone, implication, consequence. The longer the email stayed unopened, the larger the story grew. Fear loves distance. It grows in the gap between you and the thing you won't touch. The kitchen light was on. A quiet hum came from the refrigerator. Outside, the sky softened into dusk colors, fading gently without asking to be noticed. Ordinary life continued. The phone was picked up once, then set back down. The screen stayed black. The thumb hovered, then retreated. "It's better to wait," the mind said. "I'll open it when I'm ready." But readiness kept moving further away. Fear often pretends to be patience. It says not yet, when what it really means is don't look. The body sat at the table, fingers tracing the edge of a placemat absent-mindedly. The texture grounded attention for a moment, woven familiar, harmless. The email still waited. There was a memory, faint but persistent, of something learned a long time ago. A story about a child who mistook a rope for a snake in the dark. About how fear filled in the missing details before light had a chance to. This felt similar. The email wasn't a snake. It was a rope in the dark. But the mind had already given it fangs. Fear doesn't announce itself as fear. It arrives dressed as caution, responsibility, self-protection. It claims it's helping by preparing you for impact. But preparation without information is just imagination. The longer the email stayed unopened, the more powerful it seemed. The mind granted it authority it hadn't earned. It became a paper tiger, fierce, in appearance hollow inside. Paper tigers look dangerous from a distance. Up close, they tear easily. The body noticed something then, the way the stomach felt tight, not from hunger, but from holding back. Holding back action. Holding back attention. Avoidance has a physical cost. The phone was picked up again, this time with both hands. Not dramatically, just firmly enough to keep it from being set down again out of habit. The screen lit up. Notifications appeared. The email sat there unchanged. Same subject line, same sender. No new information had been added in all these hours of worry. That was important. Fear had been doing all the work. The thumb hovered over the screen once more. A pause. Not a dramatic pause. Just a breath passing through the body, deeper than before. Opening the email wasn't bravery. It was clarity. The tap was soft, almost anticlimactic. The message loaded, and immediately something shifted. Not relief yet, just reality. The email wasn't catastrophic. It wasn't even surprising. It was a request for clarification, a small issue, a delay, an invitation to respond, not a verdict. The body reacted before the mind could interpret. Shoulders dropped, breath released. The tightness in the chest loosened. The paper tiger collapsed the moment it was touched. All the imagined consequences evaporated in seconds. The fear had been real, but its object had not. The mind felt embarrassed, then amused, then quiet. So much energy had gone into guarding against something that never existed. The phone was set down again, this time without urgency. The email could be answered later. It didn't demand immediate action. It didn't carry danger. Fear had inflated it because it was unseen. The body leaned back in the chair, noticing how different the room felt now. Same light, same sounds, same evening. But the atmosphere had changed. Seeing something clearly doesn't always solve it, but it almost always shrinks it. The paper tiger hadn't been defeated. It had been exposed. And in that exposure, the fear that had been pacing all day finally had nothing left to protect. The room stayed the same, but the body didn't. It settled back into itself, like something that had been held too tightly all day was finally allowed to rest. The chair felt more supportive. The floor felt solid again. Even the air seemed easier to breathe. Nothing external had changed much. The email still existed. The situation still required a response at some point. Life hadn't rearranged itself in response to one opened message. What had changed was the relationship to it. Fear loses most of its power the moment it's looked at directly. Not because the thing you fear always turns out to be harmless. Sometimes it isn't, but because uncertainty no longer gets to do all the talking. Avoidance gives fear time to grow teeth. Every hour the email stayed unopened, the mind filled in more detail. Tone, consequence, outcome. The story expanded without resistance. Fear didn't need facts. It only needed space. That's why the paper tiger looked so convincing from a distance. Up close, it had no weight. The body noticed how much energy had been spent on not opening the email. The constant checking of the phone, the repeated internal debates, the low-level tension that ran in the background all day. Avoidance doesn't feel like effort, but it is. It taxes the nervous system quietly, constantly. It asks the body to stay alert without resolution, to brace without release. Opening the email wasn't about courage. It was about stopping that drain. Clarity, even when it's uncomfortable, costs less than imagination. The mind replayed the moment briefly, the tap, the message loading, the realization that nothing terrible was waiting on the other side. There was a mild embarrassment there, a self-conscious smile at how intense the fear had felt compared to the reality. But there was no need to turn that into self-criticism. Fear doesn't mean you're irrational. It means you're human. The brain is designed to anticipate threats. It would rather overreact than miss something dangerous. When information is missing, it fills the gap in the direction of caution. The trouble comes when we mistake that caution for truth. Paper tigers appear everywhere. Unanswered calls, conversations we keep postponing, results we don't want to look at yet. They grow bigger the longer they're left alone. The solution isn't to rush headfirst into everything uncomfortable. It's to notice when fear has become inflated by distance rather than reality. Distance feeds fear. Contact shrinks it. The phone buzzed again, another notification unrelated. The body didn't flinch this time. The reaction had changed. Fear had lost its momentum. The email would be answered tomorrow or the next day. There was time. That had been true all along. What had been missing wasn't time it was seeing. The chair scraped softly as it was pushed back. The body stood and stretched arms, lifting overhead, spine lengthening. The movement felt good, not because the problem was solved, but because tension had been released. The kitchen light was turned off. The room dimmed gently, shadows falling into their usual places without turning into threats. Darkness wasn't dangerous when it wasn't filled with imagined claws. The paper tiger had never been real, but the fear had been. And fear doesn't need to be fought. It needs to be met. Met with light. Met with contact. Met with a willingness to see what's actually there. The body moved through the house steps, steady attention present. Nothing followed. Nothing lurked. Nothing demanded immediate defense. The day's tension didn't disappear entirely. It softened. That was enough. Tomorrow would bring new messages, new unknowns, new opportunities for fear to build its paper constructions. But now, there was a reference point. A reminder that not everything that looks fierce from a distance has substance. And that often, the simplest action looking is what turns a threat back into what it really is, just paper, waiting to be seen. The porch was quiet in a way that felt earned, not silent exactly. There was the soft movement of air through the trees, the occasional sound of a car passing a few blocks away, tires hissing briefly against pavement before fading. A porch light cast a warm circle that didn't reach very far, leaving the edges of the night untouched. The person sat on the steps, elbows resting loosely on their knees. A thin blanket was folded beside them, unused. The air was cool but not uncomfortable. Earlier that day, words had been thrown their way, not shouted, not dramatic, just spoken casually, almost carelessly. Opinions, judgments, a few sentences that landed heavier than they were meant to. The kind of words people release and then forget about, assuming they'll dissolve on their own. They hadn't dissolved. They had followed the person home, settled somewhere behind the ribs, tightened the chest in small, quiet ways, returned during moments of stillness like now. The mind replayed them automatically. Why would they say that? What gives them the right? Do they really think that's who I am? Each replay sharpened the edge a little more. The night sky stretched overhead, dark and wide. Clouds moved slowly across it, their shapes changing as they went. They weren't dramatic clouds. no storm. Just thick enough to block stars, thin enough to keep moving. The person watched them without trying to. There was a familiar urge to answer the words from earlier, to correct the record, to defend, to explain, to make sure the version of them that lived in someone else's mind wasn't distorted. That urge carried heat. Anger in this form didn't feel explosive. It felt solid, like a weight pressing down. The porch step beneath them felt firm, unmoving. The wood held its shape without complaint. The contrast stood out. The clouds above shifted constantly. The step stayed where it was. A thought drifted in, uninvited and simple. I don't have to move for this. The words from earlier were still there, still sharp in memory, still unpleasant, but they were beginning to feel less like something that needed engagement and more like something passing through. Clouds don't ask mountains to respond. They don't insult them. They don't define them. They just pass. The person adjusted their position slightly, finding a more comfortable angle on the step. The movement was small, practical. The body responded with a slight easing. Earlier anger had pushed them to stand up inside, to brace, to prepare for argument, to gather evidence, to rehearse explanations that might never be used. Sitting here now, none of that felt necessary. The mountain doesn't chase clouds away. It doesn't argue with their shapes. It doesn't try to prove its solidity. It remains. The words from earlier began to feel lighter. Not gone, just less dense. They still existed, but they no longer pressed so hard against the chest. The person noticed their breath for the first time in a while. It moved steadily, not deep, not shallow, just present. The clouds continued their slow crossing. One thinned out its edges, dissolving into the dark. Another drifted in behind it, briefly taking its place. The words in the mind did something similar. One replay faded. Another appeared, then softened. Nothing was being forced away. Nothing was being held. The porch light hummed faintly. A moth circled it once, then disappeared into the night. The world carried on without commentary. Forgiveness hadn't arrived yet. It didn't need to. What had arrived was space. Space between the person and the words. Space where the body didn't need to tense. Space where identity wasn't up for debate. The mountain doesn't absorb the clouds. It doesn't become them. It lets them pass overhead, knowing they'll change shape and move on, whether it reacts or not. The person stayed seated, watching the sky shift, feeling the steadiness beneath them. And for the first time since the words were spoken, it felt possible not to carry them any further tonight. The night grew a little deeper while the person sat there. Not darker in a dramatic way, just quieter. The street sounds thinned out. The air cooled another degree, enough to notice on the skin, but not enough to be uncomfortable. The porch light stayed steady, unchanged by the shift. The clouds kept moving. Some thickened briefly, gathering into heavier shapes, then stretched thin again, as if pulled apart by an invisible hand. None of them stayed long enough to become anything fixed. The words from earlier followed the same pattern now. One surfaced, paused, then drifted on. They no longer arrived as a solid block. They came in fragments, losing their weight as they passed through attention. The sting that had felt so sharp before softened into something dull, then into something almost neutral. The person realized how much effort had gone into holding those words in place, replaying them, interpreting them, arguing with them silently. That effort had felt necessary, like vigilance, like self-respect. But sitting here, it was clear that vigilance wasn't the same as stability. The porch step didn't strain to stay solid. It didn't tense against the night air. It didn't react when clouds blocked the stars. It simply stayed. The body took that in. The shoulders dropped a little more. The chest felt less compressed. The breath moved without obstruction, as if it had been waiting for permission. Forgiveness, when it finally appeared, didn't come with emotion. No warmth, no reconciliation, no sense of moral victory. It came as a practical understanding. The words don't need a home in me. They could exist somewhere else, in the air, in memory, in someone else's mind, but they didn't need to live in the body. The mountain doesn't store clouds. It doesn't cling to them. It doesn't follow them once they pass. The person leaned back slightly, letting their weight settle into the step. The wood creaked softly, adjusting, then held. There would be other days like this, other comments, other judgments, other moments when someone else's words would drift too close and brush against something sensitive. That didn't need denying. But tonight had made something clear: reacting wasn't the only way to protect oneself. Standing still was an option too. The mind tested this new understanding briefly, offering one last replay of the words just to see if they still hurt. They didn't land the same way. They arrived thin, faded faster, left less behind. Not because they were suddenly true or false, but because they no longer had a surface to stick to. The clouds continued on, opening small patches of sky where stars briefly showed through. One by one, faint points of light appeared, then vanished again as another cloud passed. Nothing stayed fixed. Nothing needed correction. The person stood up slowly, brushing their hands against their legs to warm them. The movement felt unhurried, complete. The anger that had been there earlier wasn't gone. It had simply lost its anchor. Without the words to grip it, had nowhere to settle. Inside the house waited, warm, ordinary, safe. Before stepping back through the door, the person looked up once more at the sky. Another cloud slid past, already changing shape, already moving on. The mountain never chased it, and tonight, neither did they. The porch light was turned off. Darkness folded in gently. The door closed behind them with a soft click. Outside, the clouds kept drifting. Inside, something stayed. The rain has already stopped, but the street still looks wet. Puddles sit in the cracks along the sidewalk, reflecting a sky that can't decide what it wants to be. Gray clouds hang low, thick enough to make the afternoon feel like it's wearing a heavy coat. The air smells clean, like the world just got rinsed. They walk without a destination, hands in their pockets, shoulders slightly forward, not because it's cold, but because the posture matches the mood. Earlier today, something small happened that didn't feel small. A short email, a quick comment, a rejection that was polite enough to be forgettable and sharp enough to sting anyway. Nothing dramatic, no shouting, no disaster. Just a quiet message that landed in the exact spot where doubt already lives. They've been carrying it around all day, like a stone in a pocket. Every time they paused, they could feel it. The weight, the reminder, the story their mind wanted to tell. See, you're not as good as you thought. You're behind. You missed your chance. You're not built for this. They know that voice. It doesn't scream. It doesn't need to. It has years of practice. It sounds reasonable. It uses facts, half-facts, old memories, and a tone that makes everything feel settled and final. They step around a puddle and keep walking. Shoes make a soft, damp sound against the pavement. A car passes slowly, tires hissing on the wet road. No one looks at them. No one knows what happened today. That's part of what makes it hard. When something hurts quietly, it feels like it must be personal, like it only happens to you. Like everyone else got the memo on how to be confident and you somehow missed it. They reach the corner and stop at the crosswalk. The light is red. They wait, watching the clouds drift above the buildings. The sky looks completely covered. No blue, no bright edge, just gray layered over gray. For a second, it feels like the day will stay like this forever, like the clouds are permanent, like the sun is gone. Then they remember something simple. The sun doesn't disappear when clouds show up. It's still there. It's just not visible. That thought is almost annoying in how obvious it is, the kind of thing people say when they're trying to be comforting, the kind of thing that can feel too small for real pain. But today, it lands differently, because the clouds in their mind work the same way. A bad message arrives, and suddenly it feels like the truth, like a final judgment, like the whole story of who they are has been decided. But maybe it's just weather. Maybe the doubt is cloud cover, not the sky. They cross the street when the light changes. The walk sign flashes. They move with the crowd for half a block, then drift away again, letting people pass. They don't feel better yet. They just feel slightly less convinced. They keep walking until they reach a small strip of trees lining the sidewalk. Leaves are dripping, shaking off the last bits of rain. A branch moves in the wind and drops water onto the concrete in scattered taps. Tap, tap, tap. The sound is steady, almost patient. They stop under one of the trees and look up. The clouds are still thick, but the light has changed. Not bright, but different. A faint warmth behind the gray. A suggestion that something stronger is still working above it all. They inhale slowly. The air feels cool in the chest. They realize how much of today they've spent trying to force the clouds away, arguing with the rejection, replaying the moment, writing better responses in their head, imagining what they should have done differently, as if thinking hard enough could rewrite the sky. But clouds move on their own time. The mind too. They rest one hand against the tree trunk, feeling the rough bark. Solid, real, not interested in their thoughts. The world continues regardless of whether they feel confident, and that strangely is comforting, because it means their mood isn't in charge of reality. They start walking again slower now, not because they're trying to calm down, but because the urgency has lost some of its fuel. The stone in the pocket is still there, but it's not the whole pocket, not the whole body, not the whole day. They turn onto a quieter street. The houses look ordinary. Lights are starting to come on in windows. Dinner smells drift out faintly when someone opens a door. Life continues. The clouds remain overhead, and somewhere behind them, unseen but steady, the sun keeps shining like it always has. They don't check the weather app. Normally they would, out of habit, as if seeing the forecast might give some control over how the day feels. But right now, they let the sky be what it is without needing confirmation. The clouds are still there, thick and low. But the light keeps shifting. Subtle changes that are easy to miss if you're rushing. The gray softens. The air warms slightly. The afternoon moves forward without asking for permission. They walk until their legs feel pleasantly tired, then slow near a small neighborhood park. The grass is darker from the rain, almost glossy. A few people sit on benches, jackets zipped, faces relaxed in that post-rain quiet. No one looks particularly happy. No one looks defeated either, just present. They sit on an empty bench and rest their hands in their lap. The wood is cool and damp. A faint breeze moves through the trees, shaking loose a few last drops of water. They think again about the message from earlier. It hasn't changed. The words are the same. The outcome hasn't softened. What has changed is the way it sits inside them. It no longer feels like a verdict. It feels like information. That difference matters. They've spent years believing that confidence means never doubting yourself. That self-worth means feeling solid all the time. That once you find it, it stays visible like permanent sunshine. But that's never been how weather works. Even the clearest skies cloud over. Even the brightest days end. None of that means the sun is fragile. It just means the world moves. They rest their head back against the bench and close their eyes for a moment. Not to escape, just to stop scanning for signs that something is wrong. Behind closed eyes, the light still exists. Diffused, gentle. Unimpressed by whether they notice it or not, they realize how often they've treated difficult feelings as evidence, as proof that they're lacking something essential, that if confidence disappears, it must not have been real to begin with. But confidence isn't the sun, it's the weather. Some days it's clear, some days it's hidden, some days it's not the point at all. The bench creaks softly as they shift. A child laughs somewhere behind them. A dog shakes off water, sending droplets in every direction. Life continues in small, uncurated moments. They don't feel inspired. They feel grounded. Grounded in the understanding that what's steady about them doesn't depend on how they feel at any given moment. That their worth isn't switched on and off by emails, opinions, or passing clouds of doubt. They open their eyes, and look up again. The clouds are breaking slightly now, not enough to reveal blue, but enough to let a brighter wash of light through. The park looks different under it, softer, more dimensional. They smile just a little, not because everything is okay, because not everything has to be. They stand and start walking again, heading back toward home. The streetlights flicker on one by one, gentle halos forming against the darkening sky. The day is ending, whether it was understood or not. As they walk, they slip their hands out of their pockets. Their shoulders settle. The stone that's been riding with them all afternoon feels lighter now. Still there, just not in control. They think about how many times they've waited to feel confident before moving forward. How often they've postponed action until the clouds cleared completely. But the sun doesn't ask the clouds to leave before it shines. It shines anyway. They reach their door and pause, keys in hand. For a second, they look back at the sky one last time. Gray, quiet, honest. They don't need it to change. They don't need themselves to change either. They step inside, close the door, and let the day stay where it belongs. Outside, moving on. Behind everything that came and went today, something steady remains. Unseen, unbothered, still shining. And that is enough. The zoo is almost empty in the late afternoon. Not the busy kind of empty. Just quiet enough that footsteps echo a little more than usual. The air smells faintly of leaves and dust. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughs, then the sound fades. There's a cage near the back. Inside it, a monkey moves constantly. Not frantic, not distressed, just never still. It jumps from one bar to another, swings, lands, pauses for half a second, then moves again. It scratches, looks around, grabs something invisible, then lets go. The motion feels endless. Watching it is oddly tiring. The body outside the cage isn't doing anything, but the eyes can't quite keep up. The mind tries to follow every movement, anticipate the next jump, understand the pattern. There isn't one. That's the point. The monkey doesn't move because it's going somewhere. It moves because it can. Because movement itself has become the habit. The mind recognizes this immediately. This is familiar. At night, thoughts behave the same way. They jump from memory to plan, from plan to worry, from worry to replay. They pause briefly, just long enough to seem manageable, then leap again. One thought finishes and another takes its place. No rest, no silence, just constant motion. The monkey grabs a piece of fruit tossed in by a visitor earlier. It bites, chews quickly, then drops the rest. A moment later, it's back to moving, climbing, hanging upside down. That detail stands out. The monkey wasn't hungry. It was stimulated. Food didn't calm it. It energized it. The mind works the same way. Every thought fed with attention becomes fuel. Every worry examined becomes more active. Every mental loop replayed becomes stronger. The cage hasn't changed. The space is the same. The bars are solid, unmoving. Nothing outside the monkey is forcing it to jump. The movement is self-sustained. That's what makes it exhausting. The monkey pauses again, looking straight out of the cage. For a brief moment, it's still, almost calm, almost resting. Then someone walks by. The monkey reacts instantly. It jumps toward the front of the cage, clinging to the bars, alert, energized. The stillness disappears as quickly as it came. Attention woke it up. The body outside the cage shifts weight slightly. There's a recognition happening, not intellectual, but physical. A sense of, oh, that's what's been happening inside. The mind jumps because it's being watched, because it's being fed, because every movement is being followed. It's not that the mind is wild by nature. It's that it's constantly stimulated. At night, when everything else quiets down, the mind finally has the spotlight. No tasks, no conversations, no distractions competing for attention. So it performs, it jumps, it replays, it imagines, it worries. Not because it's broken, because it's being fed. The monkey grabs the bars again, shaking them lightly. Not enough to cause a scene, just enough to remind everyone it's there. The mind does this too. It shakes old memories. It rattles future scenarios. It brings up unfinished conversations. Anything to keep attention on it. Watching the monkey long enough makes one thing clear. Telling it to stop won't work. Yelling at it won't work. Explaining won't work. And feeding it definitely won't work. The only time the monkey slowed down earlier was when no one was paying attention. When the crowd moved on. When the cage became uninteresting again. The monkey didn't fall asleep immediately. It just moved less. That feels important. Calm doesn't come from forcing stillness. It comes from removing stimulation. The body outside the cage takes a step back, not dramatically, just enough to break eye contact. The monkey notices at first, then loses interest. Its movements soften slightly. Still active, but less sharp, less performative. The cage hasn't opened. The monkey hasn't changed. Only the attention has. And suddenly the constant motion doesn't feel so powerful anymore. A few steps back is all it takes. Not leaving. Not turning away completely. Just enough distance that the movement inside the cage no longer fills the entire field of view. The bars are still there. The monkey is still there. But the urgency fades when it's no longer the center of attention. At first, the monkey reacts. It jumps again, louder this time. Climbs higher. Shakes the bars a little harder, as if to say, "Look, I'm still here." The movements feel exaggerated, almost desperate. That's what happens when attention is removed. The mind does the same thing. When it's no longer being fed, it gets louder before it gets quieter. Thoughts speed up. Worries sharpen. Old memories resurface with more intensity than usual. It feels like things are getting worse. They aren't. They're just not being reinforced anymore. The monkey keeps moving, but something shifts. The jumps don't land as precisely. The pauses last a fraction longer. The energy isn't endless anymore. It's being spent. Without food, without constant engagement, the body inside the cage has to work harder to keep going. The mind too gets tired when it's not constantly stimulated. This is the part people rarely expect. They think calm should arrive immediately, that once attention is withdrawn, peace should take over. But the nervous system doesn't work that way. Habits don't dissolve on command. They burn out slowly through lack of fuel. The monkey stops shaking the bars. It sits for a moment, crouched low, breathing fast, still alert, still restless, but no longer performing. The space outside the cage feels wider now. Sounds from elsewhere in the zoo drift back in. Wind in the trees, distant footsteps. Life happening beyond this one enclosure. The mind notices this too when it's no longer fixated on its own movement. Other sensations return. The weight of the body, the feel of air on the skin, the simple fact of being here without commentary. The monkey stands again, moves a little, then settles into a slower rhythm. Climbing without urgency. Sitting longer between movements. Watching instead of reacting. It hasn't become calm. It's becoming bored. And boredom, in this case, is a gift. A mind that isn't being fed doesn't need to be controlled. It winds down on its own. The same way a child eventually falls asleep when no one responds to every sound they make. The monkey yawns. It's small, easy to miss if you weren't watching closely, but it's there. The body outside the cage feels something soften at the same time. A sense of permission. Not to fix, not to manage, just to let the process happen. This is what not feeding the monkey really means. It doesn't mean suppressing thoughts. It doesn't mean forcing silence. It doesn't mean getting rid of the cage. It means not reacting to every movement, not following every jump, not handing out attention like treats, not mistaking activity for importance. The monkey curls up against the side of the cage now, still awake, still aware, but no longer restless. The constant jumping has slowed to small adjustments, shifting weight, scratching, settling. Nothing dramatic happened. No breakthrough, no command, no victory, just fatigue. The mind works the same way when it's allowed to. Thoughts may still appear. They don't vanish completely, but they lose their edge. They arrive, linger briefly, then leave without dragging everything else with them. There's a quiet realization here. The mind isn't noisy because it's broken. It's noisy because it's been overfed. And like the monkey, it doesn't need discipline as much as it needs fewer snacks. The crowd near the cage thins out. People move on. The enclosure becomes just another part of the background. The monkey stays where it is, resting. The cage hasn't opened. The world hasn't changed. Tomorrow will still bring thoughts, worries, plans, and memories. But now there's understanding. You don't have to fight the mind. You don't have to chase it. You don't have to follow it everywhere it goes. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is stop watching, stop reacting, stop feeding, and let the monkey, finally tired from all its jumping, curl up and rest on its own. The movement fades into stillness, not forced, just earned. and the night feels quiet enough to hold it. Wherever you are tonight, I'm grateful you chose to spend this quiet time here. If these stories help you rest, you're welcome to subscribe and return whenever you need a gentle place to land. And now, you don't need to do anything more. Let the night hold what you can't carry. And if sleep comes, let it come.